Thanks for having me. We're going to talk about the power of data in your operations as a macadamia grower. There's a lot of different aspects that we're going to be talking about today. As usual, I start off with the obvious production benchmark, as that's one of the key ones that we spend most of our time on. So let me just check if this thing works. All right, let's go. So to start off today's discussion, I'm going to spend some time on the benchmarking tool. All right, as we're going to try to figure out how growers on farm level can use data in informative ways to help them in decision making. The benchmark tool plays into that. And then from there on, we're going to go on to the KZN study group. We call it a KZN study group, but it's pretty much our benchmark growers that participate in our benchmark. And they've got a unique way of using that benchmark tool in order to learn from each other and to create scenarios where they can improve their own farming practices. All right. Then thirdly, we're going to look at a case study where we've normalized for various different factors within the production process. And that's going to be in conjunction with the Feltology tool that SAMAC sponsored and spend a lot of time with the help of Alsha and Lisa. And we're going to spend some time on that as well. So just to get everyone to understand what we're going to be talking about in terms of the benchmark tool, we started this off with the 2019 season. In 2020, we started off with 3,300 hectares. It's difficult to start a benchmark study where growers can slot in their own data and compare against other growers on different aspects within the production process. All those complicated metrics in measuring how good you are in terms of getting to gross margin level. So we started off with 3,300 hectares. 2020, we grew to 6,300 hectares. And into the 2021 season, we're already at 7,700 hectares. And you'll see I put in brackets 462 hectares. We're getting hectares from Malawi, we're getting hectares from Zimbabwe, we're getting hectares from Mozambique. So there's a lot of value seen in the benchmarking tool as growers can just kind of get a feel for where they are in terms of how effective they are at different levels. All right, so benchmarking is complicated. It's not an easy thing. We have to normalize for so many different things. So I always start out my presentation with age distribution, all right? Because this affects everything. It affects income per hectare. It affects your production cost. And what you can see, the group that participates in our benchmark, the 7,700 hectares, you'll see the enormous amount of trees aged 3 to 4. You'll see that spike. You'll see that spike there, 23.5%. Of all the orchards is only 3 to 4 years old. And, we've been talking about this whole day. Where is the yield going? Are we going to reach 135,000 tons in the next 5 years? Looking at that graph, you can see why that backs up the forecast going forward. All right, and also in the bottom right corner, you can see how much of that is Beaumont's. It's 38%. So that's a significant chunk of our benchmark, which is mostly commercial growers across Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and Natal. So, and this is going to determine, or it's going to help us to understand when we look at how much it costs to produce a hectare of macadamias for X and Y result. This kind of skews that figure. All right, so those trees aged 0 to 6 has a massive influence on where perceived cost per hectare is versus where it's going to go actually when those trees really start coming into production and putting on a proper crop. All right, so don't worry about this is 6 graphs, but this pretty much summarizes the whole benchmark. What you'll see on the top left graph, I'm going to read it top left, down, right, up, and then I'm going to snake through it like that quickly. It shows you we've normalized for 9-year and older trees, except for production cost per hectare. We looked at 5-year and older trees, which, in other words, bearing. All right, so 2019 season, we started off with just over 3 tons per hectare for a mature orchard. This is all cultivars, all regions, just an average of our benchmark group. 3 tons a hectare. It dropped in 2020 to 2.3 tons a hectare, and then it dropped even more to 2.1 tons a hectare. So now you can understand why it's difficult for SAMAC to do a proper crop forecast, because of climatic conditions and management practices and whatever, on-farm production in kilograms per hectare or tons per hectare just went down, and then 2020 was a very big crop again, and that's why we ended up at the current crop forecast about 68,000, I think, 68,200, 68,500. So it went down. Sound kernel results, 32% in 2019, up 33.9%, and it stayed relatively consistent in 2021, also at 33.9%. So, you'll have your certain production regions that's quite a bit lower, and you'll have your other production regions that's quite a bit higher. So on average, we're average. Mark Twain said, lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? So staying relatively consistent for the last 2 years. Then on the unsound kernel, it came down from 3%, so I'm in the middle bottom graph there, from 3% down to 2.2%, which shows a lot of effort going into management of the unsound kernel, which has a massive cost implication for the growers, whereas sound kernel has an income, is the driver of income at factory level, and that gave us the net result of the middle top graph, back on farm income per hectare. So back on farm income per hectare is a result of a lot of different factors, including mostly exchange rate, all right, and dollar selling price, obviously. All right, but that gave us the net return for our growers at 74 Rand in 2019, went up. In 2020, we hit almost 19 Rand to the dollar, ended up at 83 Rand a kilogram, and then it came down in 2021 to 68 Rand, all right? Now you ask Peter and all the experts in the industry, what's going to be the net result for this year? What's going to be the result for next year? We don't know. But we're all nervous about it. We're very nervous about it, all right, as dollar prices are decreasing. Luckily, we've got a great government, and they're always stashing some dollars under seats or under, whatever. So there's always something in the news, and we got an exchange rate currently of 18 Rand 10 or something. So that's great. So that keeps us in the game. Okay. All right. Next, jumping to income per hectare. We're looking at, all the drivers, dry and cell kilogram per hectare, sound and unsound being a massive driver of your back on farm income per kilogram, and that combined, all the variables, income per hectare, 2019, 200,000 Rand a hectare, dropped to 170,000 Rand a hectare, and then it dropped to 130,000 Rand a hectare. So within 2 years, we dropped by 70,000 Rand a hectare on back on farm income per hectare. So that's massive, all right? Now I want you guys to have a look at the bottom right graph, production cost per hectare. So we played around with the tree ages. We're looking at 5-year and older trees, okay, bearing orchards. So what we did is we calculated a weighted average tree age for every farming unit that participates in our benchmark study, and we removed all the farms that on weighted average are below 5 years of age. So the majority of their planted hectares are only 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, okay? So we removed those. So looking at the production cost per hectare, went up from 50,000 Rand a hectare in 2019 up to 56, and now we're sitting at 62. So you can see what's happening to income per hectare and what's happening to production cost per hectare. The cost squeeze is becoming real, all right? And that's what we're going to talk about today, quickly. And I really want to invite you guys to ask a couple of really hard questions afterwards for everyone, and then I'm going to point to Alsha and Alvin and whoever, Pierre, to help us to answer these questions. But this gives us an indication of what's happening, and there's a definite cost squeeze for macadamia producers. And this year, with a down price, we had a very big crop. So we haven't worked out the figures yet. We're obviously still going to wait for the agterskot to see what really happened at the end of the day. But I'm expecting it to fall back to more or less 2020's income per hectare, but we'll see. Okay. all right, we're talking about the power of data, okay? What do we do with data? And this is where I'm going to jump to the KZN study group, and I'm also going to mention our Lavubu group of growers, also doing a similar thing, but on a different platform. So I don't know what happened to my presentation, but anyway, our KZN study group, you'll see most of the bars are in orange or brown, and then we've got a couple of green bars, and we've got a couple of blue bars, all right? So the green bars are our KZN South growers, the blue bars are our KZN North growers, and what we're looking at here is, this is just an example, it's not what the actual model looks like. The actual model actually tells you each grower's name, all right? So each of the participating growers in KZN said, no, we want to open up books. We want to learn from each other. We want to understand what the drivers are of income potential versus cost, and I want to learn from X, Y, and Z grower, but I don't want to look at it just a grower code. You'll see there's a lot of randomized codes down there, codes, OL516, HL577, so that's how we protect the grower's anonymity, because it's sensitive information when you talk about, your income per hectare, your cost per hectare. It is a bit sensitive. So just for the purposes of display, I highlighted the group that actually opens up books. And they have a unique login onto the benchmark platform where they can see, this is Doveton Farms, this is UVS, this is Golden Grow, this is whatever, So the guys can pick up the phone and say, okay, well, what are you guys doing differently? You guys are obviously doing something differently. We want to learn from each other. So this is how the KZN study group is using this. So this graph shows you, it's a metric that we just use to measure the production side. Effective sound kernel per hectare, okay? So normalized for tree age, 9 years and older, tons per hectare multiplied by sound kernel percentage. That's the majority of the driver of income. This is just a metric that we can use. In avocados or citrus, we call it effective 4 kilogram cartons produced per hectare, or effective 15.5 kilogram cartons per hectare, right? On the max, we use effective sound kernel kilograms per hectare. I think in Australia, they've got a 1.5 ton club or something like that. So this is where we're aiming for to get to maximize profitability, right? So the benchmark average at 810, massive differences between the top growers and the bottom growers, all right? So the top growers would have high yields, high sound kernel percentage. The bottom growers would have low yields and low sound kernel percentage. And the growers in the middle would either have high yields and low sound kernel, or a mix of between, average yields and average sound kernel percentage. And this kind of brings all those variables together. Okay. But what it boils down to is this, the gross margin. All right, so back on farm income minus production cost, right? So we're not talking about overhead costs. We're not talking about salaries or VX200 cruisers or boats or none of that. We're talking about just measuring the gross margin on farm level of farming macadamias, right? So we took a 2-year average and we said, okay, for the purposes of what we want to look at today, just look at 6-year and older orchards, okay? The producing orchards. Yes, we can debate, is it 5, is it 4, is it 6, or whatever. Our growth curve shows that we actually only reach maximum yield potential in year 14. So 6 is way off, but with different farming practices, growers are coming out of the blocks quite a lot quicker. So we just drew a line in the sand and we said, okay, for trees aged 6 years and older, farming units, okay, so with weighted average tree ages of 6 and older, gross margin of 40,000 rand a hectare.